Mike Tomlin is out in Pittsburgh, but does that mean he could be in Atlanta?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Falcons, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. Of course, I am your humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong, now in year 10 as the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we'll be talking about the big news of the day. Mike Tomlin is out in Pittsburgh, and whether or not the Falcons should make a pursuit of that. We'll pick our guest's brain on the Falcons' ongoing coaching search, any big takeaways he has from Matt Ryan's introductory press conference as the president of football in all of the galaxy. And then we'll get into a nice little debate about Kyle Pitts and whether or not the Falcons should bring him back. But let me introduce my very illustrious guest. He is none other than Allen Strk, former co-host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, former co-host of the Falcons Fans podcast, still covering the Atlanta Falcons as a contributor over at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. Alan, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
Thank you, Aaron. And doesn't it warm your heart that we started doing podcasts in 2013? Matt Ryan's back in our lives. He was in our lives for so long, and now he's back.
Yeah, it was nice seeing Matt in front of a microphone with Atlanta Falcons. Emory Healthcare or whatever the backdrop is always there. It felt like home. But we'll get into that later. But let's talk about the big story of the day, and that's Mike Tomlin stepping down as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Lots of speculation since that revelation early Tuesday afternoon about his future, the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm curious, Alan, when you first saw the news, what were your thoughts?
I wasn't surprised. I just think it was a matter of time. Pittsburgh needs to start fresh. I know we're focused on the Falcons side of it, but you just watch the game, you watch the Steelers for the last 2 years. It's just you see the ceiling there, and to be a playoff team with no legitimate case to make a run where you're not a threat at all, it's hard to watch. And you look at the Steelers team, they never once in these past 2 playoff games looked like they posed any sort of threat. So I think that organization needs a full reset. Tomlin looked pretty burnt out. Cue Aaron Rodgers, Arthur Smith jokes, but I just think he definitely needed to freshen things up. And I think the organization just needs to get younger. I believe they have 7 picks in the first 4 rounds. You look at the TJ Watt contract, maybe trade him. I just think they just need a total reset. And Tomlin, at this point of his career, I don't think he really needs to do that. So I think it works best for both parties.
Yeah. Now, since we talk about the Atlanta Falcons here, what are your thoughts? And again, there's various reports about what Tomlin's intentions are, whether he's going to try to coach this year or sit out a year, and all the things that go with that, similar to what we saw with Sean Payton several years ago when he stepped down from the Saints, and then ultimately, because he was still under contract with the Saints, got traded to the Broncos, and that whole rigmarole. We'll leave that part aside on sort of, if the Falcons or another team were to pursue Tomlin, would they have to give up, first round picks that the Falcons don't have? But, in a world where we don't have to worry about that, what would be your thoughts on the Falcons potentially pursuing Mike Tomlin? I've seen a lot of people saying he immediately becomes the top coach on the market. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I'll preface that I do think Tomlin would take a year off. I think it's just bound to happen, similar to what Sean Payton did, like you mentioned. But yeah, I would absolutely, no hesitation, I put him in that Matt LaFleur tier of, if he's available, absolutely, by any means, go get him. Tomlin's still someone that the players are going to ride for him, and there's not too many coaches you could say that players are going to run through a wall for. He's still a super motivator. And people could talk about the flaws in his defense schematically, but they did some pretty cool things. You look at the matchups against both Detroit and Baltimore, and those were must-win situations. A lot of high-leverage moments where you saw Tomlin get a little bit in his bag schematically with the simulated rushes and the coverage disguises, mixing up cover 3, cover 4. So I think for all the talk that Tomlin's scheme is a bit formulaic, which it has at times been. I know teams have picked on it. But when he has to get schematically creative, I think in big games he's kind of proven it this year. So between the culture aspect and him still being one of the better, I guess, schematic minds defensively, absolutely take Tomlin.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I feel like with Tomlin, there are some things that I would like to see him get with the times schematically, and be a little bit more flexible, more adaptable, rather than just like he's kind of that classic coach is like, this is what we do and we're going to do it well, and it's all up to you to stop it. And I think that's been one of the more frustrating aspects for some Steeler fans of, it does very much feel like the defense and some of the schematic stuff hasn't necessarily evolved as much as you would expect over these last 5 to 10 years. But I think, as you mentioned it, you're right. Like, when it comes to coaches, I feel like the top coaches are either one of two things. And most of them are one thing, which is just a great coordinator, a great play caller on whatever side of the ball that they are. And they're always going to give their team a significant advantage when it comes to that aspect. I think the harder thing to find when it comes to a coach is, I think, as you just put it, a master motivator in that regard, and someone who can consistently get high effort buy-in from his players after 2 decades. You compare that to some of the rumors that have been coming out of Baltimore, where it did feel like there's been much more polarization, I guess, within that locker room when it came to John Harbaugh and whether or not his message started to get a little bit stale with some of those players. You don't ever really hear that about Mike Tomlin. And so that is something that I think is very unique to Mike Tomlin. That's one of the reasons why he's so well respected around the league. Again, the only real knock on Tomlin is you've kind of seen how far that goes, in terms of that ability as a coach, when you don't have high-level quarterback play, when you don't have a particularly great offensive scheme, which has been plaguing the Steelers for the most part these last couple of years. Arthur Smith certainly was an upgrade over Matt Canada, but by no means it is. I'm sure there's one person in the comments that's like, Arthur Smith is an offensive genius, but I don't think that's the general sentiment that people have in 2026 as maybe they had in 2021. And so it does put maybe a ceiling on your team if you don't check those boxes. And I think for whatever team Tomlin goes to, hopefully he positions himself in a position where he doesn't have to worry about those things. And I heard a friend of the show, JP Acosta, earlier today talk about Tomlin sitting out a year and going potentially to replace Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like a match made in heaven. Another team that I thought about, if he does sit out a year, is a team like Washington, with Jay Daniels there.
Leave Dan Quinn alone, man.
I mean, we all know Dan Quinn's on the hot seat, man. When you're
Already?
When you're firing all your coordinators, you're on the hot seat, my guy.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Dang.
So I look at those two teams as like teams that could help resolve some of the quote unquote shortcomings of Mike Tomlin if he goes down that path in the future. Obviously, here in Atlanta, the quarterback situation is untested, and then obviously you would have to figure out, an offensive coordinator in that regard. But those are just some thoughts that I had over the last few hours about Mike Tomlin's future.
I will say, based on the reports, Washington's front office seems to be in a bit of disarray. Some reports about Adam Peters doesn't have everything well constructed. I think the last thing Tomlin's going to go into is a front office that is not on the same page. And even though Tampa Bay's roster has been diminished past year, Jason Light still has a good handle on things structurally there. So I would say Tampa Bay is a lot more of a tracked option than Washington. Also, for the simple fact that we know how easy it is to compete in the NFC South compared to the NFC East. But I also want to mention the last thing on Tomlin. Deserves credit for being adaptable, because I do think whether it's him, front office, they overrated their roster going to season, and they quickly realized they were way too old. Darius Slay is a liability. I think they were relying too much on their front four to generate pressure when those players are aging. Even though Cam Hayward and TJ Watt They definitely played better as the season progressed, but I don't think you could rely on him to be the anchors like they were 2-3 years ago. So the fact that you saw players like Herrig and Sawyer utilizing them on blitz, and I think bringing Kyle Dougler was a pretty savvy move on their part too. You saw, especially in that Colts game. Let's not forget this team, Tomlin, that defense forced 6 turnovers when the Colts were at their peak. So that's another feather in Tomlin's cap this year. And you just saw the way he was dropping both Highsmith and Watt to coverage. So I do think this was one of more Tomlin's impressive coaching jobs. I largely put the Steelers' downfall this season on just their offense being incapable of pushing the ball downfield and Aaron Rodgers' physical limitations. But I do think they got some of the personnel decisions wrong with the defense. But I think Tomlin showed they made adjustments, and it's a big reason why they ended up winning the AFC North.
Okay. Well, I mentioned Washington just because Washington is kind of his hometown team because he's from Virginia. So, I don't know. Again, I have no idea if Mike Tomlin was like a big Redskins fan growing up or anything like that. So I just wonder if there's maybe some attachment to that city in that town.
I think Tampa Bay is a great shot, though, just because you heard about the warm weather reports. You start to compete quickly. But then again, you don't know what their QB situation. Baker has 1 year left. So, I don't know, like, Tomlin's been in QB hell for like the past 5 years. Does he want to deal with that again? So, but I'm looking forward to seeing him on TV. I personally love to see him on TV rest of as long as he wants to. I think he'd be a great addition. Not sure if I want to see him on Fox because there's better outlets out there, but I digress.
I talked to a Falcon fan and he was joking. Mike Tomlin and Raheem Morris on TV this year is going to be must see TV. And whatnot. And, I wouldn't be shocked if wherever Mike goes, Raheem follows him potentially as his defensive coordinator in 2027. So we'll see on that front. But obviously, if there is, more news that, Mike Tomlin is, itching to get back into coaching, we'll certainly be covering it here on Locked On Falcons. But let's move on and talk about the ongoing coaching search, get Alan's thoughts on that, as well as his thoughts on hearing from Matt Ryan, the president of football in the Northern Hemisphere, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So let's be real. When you started your business, you weren't worried about tax withholdings and managing payroll spreadsheets, but thankfully there's Gusto. They're going to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that's going to make managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. Gusto will save you hours each week with their automated tools, like their offer letters, onboarding materials, direct deposits, and you'll get real peace of mind knowing you can reach a certified HR expert anytime you need it. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, gusto.com/LockedOnNFL.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
So, Alan, Matt Ryan introduced as the president of football on Tuesday morning. Today, basically my main takeaways were, he was asked about, what he looked for in a coach, and he was just kind of like, I'm not going to say generic or anything like that, but it's like all the things that you would describe a great coach, a great communicator and
He hit on the bullet points.
Character, emotional stability, presence, command, connecting with players, building a great staff. It was like all the boxes that you're supposed to check. And, someone I had an insider joke and be like, sounds like Raheem Morris. And I'm just like, it sounds like all coaches. All good coaches are like that. But, the other thing that sort of came out was, there's been a lot of confusion, I guess you could say, on sort of, how much pull is Matt Ryan going to have? And he kind of, hopefully, now there's a little bit more clarity on, his job is really to kind of hire the coach and the GM, and then to kind of step back and be more of a support system than necessarily being a guy that's going to put, his fingers into the pie and metal and whatnot. But I'm curious, listening, watching, seeing some of the quotes, whatever, from that presser, what were your thoughts and some of your takeaways from that?
The biggest highlight was how we highlighted accountability within assistant coaches, and people could read that into maybe it was one of Raheem Morris's downfalls, because you look what happened with Marquise Williams and Zach Robinson. So the idea of the head coach really being on point with the assistants, and if there's glaring breakdowns week after week, they got to be more decisive in improving it, because it's pretty clear that the Falcons just did not really improve in certain areas, whether it be the predictable play calling, where you had both San Francisco, Miami, and Carolina within a 3-week span. You had defensive players in post-game interviews talking about how they knew play calls were coming before then. And maybe Zach Robinson improved a little bit as the season went on, but it definitely wasn't anything eye-opening that made you feel confident about him going forward. And then we know about the glaring special teams issues where returners didn't even have to do much to break open to open field. So the fact that he highlighted being accountable in terms of holding accountability on the assistants, I think is very important. But besides that, I think it's good that he also clarified his role, because I think some people remember earlier in the season with Tom Brady and the whole Chip Kelly situation, there were some reports that Tom Brady were in some film meetings and he was trying to put his input into the offense with Chip Kelly. And that kind of created a murky situation, especially given how much the Raiders struggled. So I think it's good that Matt Ryan clarified that, because Matt Ryan, while it could be helpful if he's in those film meetings, do you really want him in that role? Like, I know he's very knowledgeable of the game, but at the same time, everyone has their responsibilities. And if you trust the coaching staff that's being hired, let them do their jobs. So as Matt Ryan, if he proves he's a master delegator and he gets it right in terms of how this team's going to be constructed with their identity and coaching, then that's what's most important, and that's what's going to lead to their success.
Now, when we talk about this coaching search, and they did also indicate, at least Greg Beatles, the team president and CEO, did indicate that they do intend to add some GM interviews into the mix. I've been assuming the whole time that they already know who their GM is going to be, and that is none other than current Bears assistant GM Ian Cunningham. But this at least makes it seem like there will be a little bit more of a process there. But Matt Ryan didn't necessarily say anything leaning one way or the other when it comes to whether they're going to hire an offensive guy or a defensive guy. I think a lot of the assumptions have been they'll either go after John Harbaugh or an offensive guy. I'm curious, a week into this sort of coaching search, where do you feel like the wind is blowing? Do you have a preference in terms of somebody that you would love to see the Falcons hire, someone that you like to see the Falcons hire, someone that you don't want to see the Falcons at all hire? I'm curious where your thoughts on this coaching search so far.
I don't have strong takes on who they shouldn't. I think there's a lot of appealing candidates out there, and we should embrace what was looking like a very underwhelming cast of coaches available now. Looks very appealing given what's with Stefanski and Harbaugh. But someone that's now available, given the team's elimination on Sunday, I think they should seriously consider Jesse Minter. I think Jesse Minter has done a fantastic job the last 2 years. The Chargers are 31st in defensive spending, and they played arguably a top 7 unit. They stifled a lot of quarterbacks this year, mixed up a lot of different coverages, and they never really had who was really like an all-pro caliber talent on that team. Like Derwin James obviously up there, and Khalil Mack could still bring a lot, but the Chargers are definitely not blessed with this overwhelming nucleus of talent. So
Dayon Henley and Tier Tart Erasure, Alan. I don't appreciate
To be fair, those two are very good players. Great point, Aaron. I'm glad you shut me up with that one. Those two have made huge strides this year, especially Tart. Tart went from being out of the league to being one of the best run stuffers.
Yeah.
So well said. I will give you that. But I think Jesse Bitzer, just from a leadership standpoint and how he mixes up his coverages and just everything you hear from working under Harbaugh, I think you have to be optimistic about him. So I know people are going to talk about John Harbaugh and, of course, Stefanski and Clint Kubiak. And I think Anthony Weaver may get some consideration as well. But ultimately, I do think Jesse Minter should be seriously considered.
Okay. Any thoughts? What was that?
Where do you stand?
I don't have a strong preference, to be honest with you. I think all these coaches have pros, they have cons. It's just going to be your ability to navigate those pros and cons. And so, I never get, I know folks think it's just a cop-out and I'm just being indignant, but I don't ever really have a strong preference on who the next Falcons coach is going to be.
All right, well, let's at least bring up Stefanski, just because I think he's arguably the most polarizing candidate. There are just some people just completely writing him off because of the last 2 years, and I just don't feel that's right, given just I don't think our front office has done a worse job than the Browns. I'm just stunned that Andrew Berry is there, given the diabolical trade for Watson and just how there's the overall quarterback plan and to decline the offensive line. Even like the playmakers, I just don't like any of their personnel moves they made offensively over the past few seasons. And the fact that Stefanski had to work with that, and maybe, look, he's culpable for that. He did have to give a play calling at some point this year. But I just think his body of work, what he did in 2020 and 2023 in particular, and even back with the Vikings, I think he's a very credible coach, and Falcons should be thrilled if he ends up being the coach.
Okay. I say that not because I disagree. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out, because I agree with you. The first 4 years he was in Cleveland plus the year in Minnesota, you would call him one of the better coaches in the NFL, top 10 caliber head coach. Last 2 years have been bad. And to me, I'm not as, I think there are reasons for that maybe are not, the fault of Kevin Stefanski, but at the same time, for me, it requires a little bit more investigation to kind of figure out, okay, how much of the downfall of the Browns over the last 2 years is on Stefanski and how much of it is on everything else around him, is sort of my open question. And that's part of the reason why, as I agree with you, he has been very polarizing. There are some people that are like, no, this would be the worst hire ever. And there are some people like, got to get him. He's the top guy available. I'm sitting on the fence at this point in time, but that's just mostly because, I want to talk a little bit more with, my Locked On Browns cohorts and some of those people that have covered that team firsthand over the last couple of years to pick their brain on it.
And I should highlight, the Browns did get one thing right offensively. Harold Fenton, I don't want to undervalue Harold Fenton. He is a tremendous talent. So at least they got one right. And Junkins.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna bring up Junkins.
Yeah, Junkins showed some promise too. So it's not all bad there. But I just think you have to look at someone, their overall body of work. I don't think we should just totally harp on the negatives. Like, for instance, Brian Flores. I've been just not appalled, but just frustrated that people keep posting that clip of Ryan Fitzpatrick talking about how Flores kind of alienated himself in Miami. Like, the Dolphins, he was there 5 years ago. We got to allow coaches to grow. And I doubt they're going to go for Flores, but I think Flores would be a tremendous candidate just based on who he's worked with in the past, 4 years, between working with Mike Tomlin and Kevin O'Connell. Two very different coaching styles, but two coaches that absolutely command respect. So I doubt he gets interest here, but it's just another example of, like, let's focus some more what the positives that the coaches bring than negatives from a certain time period.
Fair enough. You mentioned Harold Fanning and his success in Kevin Stefanski's offense. In a world where Kevin Stefanski is the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, could he do similar things with a certain Kyle Pitts? And I know, I've said on this podcast, I don't think the Falcons should bring Kyle Pitts back this offseason. I feel like Allen has a differing opinion on that. So, let's take it back to 2013 when we were arguing about OCU Manora or whatever we were arguing about back in those days.
Definitely weren't arguing OCU Manora. I was heartbroken over John Abraham.
Okay.
We might have been arguing over Paul Soliai because
Okay,
I've always said I was a Paul Soliai guy.
That might be more accurate. But let's have a healthy debate about whether or not the Falcons should be signed Kyle Pitts to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now it's a new year with new systems, and that's not just true for the Atlanta Falcons, but it's for everyone, since this is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think, well, there's got to be a better way, and there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications, because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed, and everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It's no surprise Quo is the number one rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnfl. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. And it's a new year, which means it's time to simplify. One way to do that is with easy, reliable dinner plan. That's why I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Home Chef. Home Chef is going to take the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated number one by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule with a wide variety of options, from family-sized meals to quick lunches, and they have plenty of options that fit different dietary choices. So if you're looking to save time and money, Home Chef has got you. Customers will save an average of $86 per month on groceries. So for a limited time, check out Home Chef, and they're offering our listeners 50% off their first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. You must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. And have your health or family needs changed lately? Well, Georgia's got you covered. Georgia Access is our state's marketplace for Georgians to compare, apply, and enroll in health insurance plans that offer the best value for their individual needs. Open enrollment is happening now. Visit georgiaaccess.gov today. Georgia Access, health insurance for Georgia, by Georgia. So, wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. You are the reason why Locked On is now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. And of course, if you want to level up your everydayerness, all you got to do is join the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. $5 a month, $50 a year, and you get some great perks like an ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, Discord access to Locked On Podcast Network, so you can talk trash to those Saints fans and that pesky Ross Jackson. And of course, you get, access to some great merch as well. So go check it out at the link in the description below. But Kyle Pitts, one of 4 All-Pros for the Atlanta Falcons. I know there's much debate about, is a second-team All-Pro a true All-Pro? We're not going to get it, though. We're going to say they're all All-Pros. Bijan Robinson, first-team All-Pro. Kyle Pitts, Chris Lindstrom, and Jesse Bates, second-team All-Pros. And of course, this was a great year for Kyle Pitts. I know, Alan, we got something coming out over at the Falcoholic in the next couple of days talking about some of the impressive things that Kyle Pitts, did this season. As someone who has championed Kyle Pitts and his potential value in this offense over the last calendar year, I feel vindicated, very vindicated, as I so often do on this podcast when, I say a thing and then it, inevitably proves to be the correct opinion. But despite Kyle Pitts' success, I don't think the Falcons should re-sign Kyle Pitts. And the main reason for that, for me, Alan, is it's kind of the same lesson that the Falcons should have learned from, bringing Kyle Pitts in the first place, right? When they drafted him 4th overall, put a premium on a tight end in a draft where, you look back in hindsight and you're like, okay, maybe that wasn't worth it. And then now you're coming up on an offseason where you could franchise tag Kyle Pitts and he could cost you $16 million and potentially be the second highest paid offensive player, skill position player behind Drake London, who presumably will get a big contract extension at some point this offseason, or possibly more than that if you sign him to a long-term contract, potentially 18, 19, maybe even $20 million for a tight end. And it just, to me, feels like if you do that, you haven't learned the lesson of, yes, Kyle Pitts is a very valuable piece to your offense, but like, I don't know if a tight end like Kyle Pitts can be a core element of your offense. And so that, to me, I feel like the Falcons have bigger fish to fry, need more help at wide receiver, need some of this cap space to plug some holes on the defense. And so, spending that on a tight end when you can probably get 75% the production of Kyle Pitts at some point, probably not from a rookie, but for, if you draft a guy in the 4th round for 10% the cost, that will probably within 2 or 3 years give you similar value to what Kyle Pitts does, to me is a much more worthwhile investment. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? And, if you believe the Falcons should re-sign Kyle Pitts, what is your best case for it?
All very strong points. I personally think they should franchise him because when you look at the body of work, I think you want to see one more year of strong all-pro caliber production, because it's on a downtown basis. There's still some glaring issues, miscues. Like Kyle Pitts had 9 penalties this year. I think he had 5 drops, and given the increased output, I think the drops were bound to happen. But you just saw some plays where a top-tier player should be committing this mistake, and a team like the Falcons with a little margin of error, it cost them because they were putting negative down distances. So you wish he could clean his game up, even though I do think he improved as a blocker, and he was really good after the catch. Still not where he should be when it comes to contested catches, but he did show some improvement there. But I think the infuriating down-to-down consistency is where I'd be concerned about, besides the fact that he's only had, 2 seasons of high-end production. Now, we know the obstacles that he faced from 2022 to 2024. That's well documented. But I'm still kind of in a wait-and-see mode, but I wouldn't want to write him off just yet, just because this team doesn't have a lot of assets offensively. And when you have limited resources, I think you should be in a position where you have to keep your assets. So I know it's a bit dangerous just because I think there are about 8 to 10 tight ends I'd rather have than Kyle Pitts, especially when you see the rise of someone like a Colson Loveland or even a Tyler Warren. But Pitts did show he can be a game changer when utilized properly. When he became the focal point of offense, there's no denying it, how he was fantastic against Tampa Bay and Arizona. And even against Seattle in that first half, he made some plays, even though I do think he left some plays on the field as well, going against Nick and Warren. But if he could just put one more year together and the down-to-down consistency is better, I think he is definitely well worth the investment. But I just think right now it's too risky to do that. But I do think, given the lack of resources, they should do everything they can to keep him for one more year and see where they go in 2027.
Yeah, I think I think tagging him and seeing what he does in 1 year under a new offensive coaching staff is probably the lesser of the two evils when it comes to Kyle Pitts at this point in time. So it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons go that route. If they do decide to keep him, it's not going to take much for me to get back on board with, Kyle Pitts' potential. It's just one of those things. And again, a lot of that will depend heavily on who the new play caller is and whether or not he can integrate both of those guys. But it's really been a struggle these last couple of years, especially to get both Drake London and Kyle Pitts going. It does feel like either one of them is eating and the other one is fairly quiet. And so that's kind of my main concern, where it's like, is there a world where you can get late season Kyle Pitts and mid-season Drake London at the same time? And if you can do that, then I think Kyle Pitts is well worth the investment. But that, obviously Zach Robinson and Arthur Smith weren't able to pull that off, and that doesn't necessarily mean that another play caller will be incapable of doing that. But to me, it remains to be seen, and I just feel like I'd much rather just draft someone like Oscar Delpa out of Georgia or whatever, or somebody like that, bring in a Chico Kwonkwo or somebody like that is going to be considerably cheaper, that can do some of the things that Kyle Pitts can do, but for a fraction of the price.
Well, you also see the quarterback play too. Like you look at games like against Carolina and Indianapolis, I think Michael Penix left several throws on the field. There are big play opportunities there. So, of course, look, we could criticize the coaching staff, but the quarterback needs to be right. And of course, there's a lot of questions with the quarterback right now. So I can see right now they have such limited resources. That's what I'm concerned about. And I don't know if they can make it up in one off season, because I do think there is pressure on this team to be competitive in 2026. Like we saw it, like the Saints were supposed to be arguably the worst team in the league, and I think with 1 or 2 more wins, they could legitimately compete for the division. They swept the NFC South champions. So I think the Falcons have to put themselves in a position, not that they're necessarily in all-out win mode, but to lose a key piece and not really have the resources to probably replace it, knowing that they could do a 1-year rental. I think you take that chance on Pitts and see what he can do 1 more year. So, and now that Matt Ryan's up for, I'm very curious to see what Matt Ryan thinks about the long-term prospects of Kyle Pitts, given that they played together for a year.
Yeah, we'll see. Alan, where can the people find your stuff? And what are some of the things you're working on?
You can find me Allen Strk. That's ALLENSTRK. Right now, working on a roundtable right now, getting a bunch of writers, including yourself, for end of the season, where we're going to focus on the players. There's so much talk about coaches, general managers, Matt Ryan. It's like, let's highlight some of the players. So this whole feature I got in the works is going to be focused on just some of the highlights from the season, some polarizing players, some things for the future. We're going to focus on that. And just I'm curious, we're talking about league topics. Are we hoping for a Bears-Patriots Super Bowl? Do we want to see Grady Jarrett and Austin Hooper back in the promised land? I'm kind of feeling that right now, as much as I love the Texans defense. And, of course, Shanny's doing such a wonderful job.
I hadn't thought about it, Sure. Yeah. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you for tuning in. Again, continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL to get the scoop on all the latest going on around the NFL. Of course, Locked On Steelers will have you covered for any and all of the Mike Tomlin fallout. And, of course, go check out the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below. $5 a month, $50 a year to get your sweet Locked On merch that I'm wearing right now. And, again, it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.